All right. So, welcome to today's cyber news. We feels like we haven't been able to get the band together on something like this in a minute. So, it's nice to be here. What I'm wanting to talk about today is WatchGuard's released through the UK government as well as the United States government CISA today around this new kind of malware from Sandworm that seems to be infecting WatchGuards. And so it's a Cyclops Blink is the conversation. It was just released this morning. And it was essentially a discussion, and I want to kick over to Dom because you've had a minute to review some of the technical of this. But essentially, threat actors could take advantage of a management interface that should never, ever, 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 ever be exposed to the internet. But if you were to have done that without an access control list and exposed your management interface, it seems the threat actor, and in this case, had the ability to make persistence through that from a vulnerability. So, Dom, kind of help me understand what we're seeing here.
Yeah, for sure. And I've only reviewed it a little bit, but I think it's an interesting one because anytime something is exploitable remotely, it automatically triggers a lot of things when we think about CVSS, right? It automatically kicks it up a notch. But I think the thing that scares me is we're talking about establishing persistence on what is likely an edge device on a network of who knows what size. And that's a problem, right? Because you could reroute traffic, you could poke holes in the firewall and let things through. The options are endless if you're infiltrating the edge, right? So that's what stood out to me here.
Yeah, especially when so much prescriptive advice is VPN to your edge, right?
Right,
And then use
right.
that protection for you. And so, essentially what I was able to garner from this article that came out from the ncsc.gov.uk was that Sandworm, its background used to be related to VPN filter as a methodology for this, was part of potentially the disruption of Ukrainian electricity in 2015, in Destroyer in 16, NotPetya in 17. So this is a well-established TTP that people are using that is now kind of migrated in that same methodology over to WatchGuards. And so if you look at this, what they're essentially doing is they're taking advantage of the management interface not having an ACL or being behind VPN. Like, so as a technician, you don't want to leave that exposed. You want to limit it to your office or to your controlled network or through VPN.
Right.
But they established a C squared or command and control network center, and then established and reached into that C squared from Tor to try to anonymize where they're coming from, right? But this essentially what it did was it gained them the ability to have a persistent user with persistent access inside the firewall that wasn't tied to firmware. That when you updated your firmware didn't fix the problem, and so they're there. And so there was a slide I saw this morning, and I don't know that I have that in my asset kit. I think it might have been internal. But that slide I saw this morning from the CEO at WatchGuard was kind of talking about how there's two paths here, right? You have the MSPs need to investigate if you did have your management interface exposed, if that was a concern.
Right.
It needs to be investigated as to whether or not the TTPs of that threat actor's persistence being there. And there's a tool they put out there that's pretty prescriptive from their scanning tool. It comes from, and I'll post all these links in the chat as we go. But it allows us to do a diagnostic and remediation, and then upgrade. And I want to assert here, you can't just upgrade. This requires investigation of whether or not the threat actor has persistence, and then changing that by fixing it with their patching tool. They actually have a tool to remediate this. And so if you can do that and then update, and then for God's
Right.
sake, close off management interface access to the internet, then you can be aware, you can be cleared here. It's helpful to state that WatchGuard did some investigation and with the federal government, and they did a lot of work with Mandiant. They actually did a lot of code review to take advantage of this opportunity of this public-private partnership, and also with Mandiant to find and fix a lot of other things that, they haven't had a CVE since like 2017. I mean, they haven't had a real WatchGuard flaw that was found from a code problem since
Right.
17. So, yeah, go
This
ahead. Sorry.
this makes me think of when we talked recently about how laws around cybersecurity only come into place after something has happened, after an event. And I'm kind of thinking of with WatchGuard and other vendors in the channel as well. What does it look like for an annual audit process of your solutions, right? It kind of seems like it was a wait for something to happen. Then let's go take a look at our source code and make some changes, fix some
Yeah.
bugs, whatever. And I'm just kind of curious, like, is that status quo for the rest of the channel, or is that what you
It
typically
is.
see?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's this big motion going right now. Like Dom and I have been talking, like John Murchison and I, and internal with our own people, Eric Stevens and others, about, right now the normal process is you either expose yourself to a bug bounty program and you hope that people help, but there's a growing movement to say, you know what, we should hire firms like Mandiant as a collective and go through processes like this where someone comes in and says this might be vulnerable and that might be vulnerable, because now you're not talking about the actual like outside extents. You're looking at source code and saying, because the way the source code lays out, you have this problem. It also gives those people, those product managers, the ability to go to that board and say, Prakash, we must deal with this. And I think what you're getting at and lending towards, Ryan, is like once the event happens, holy crap, WatchGuard probably grew 13 or 14 iterations. Like they're being super humble, super transparent about this, but they've now fixed other things that would have become problems because of this partnership. Exactly. And if we as an industry could find a way to collaborate and have a better practices along this kind of partnership with expertise, I think we'd all be more secure for it.
I feel like it's the home renovation scenario where the moment you pull up the carpet, you see the floor's rotted. Now the joists got to be fixed, and now this has to happen. So it's just all over the place. It's kind of wild.
Well, it's a hindsight's 2020 thing too, right? Like,
sure.
I think especially if you're developing code or product, that tends to take priority, right? When we're like, we want to get this new feature out, or we want this functionality, or users are asking for that. It's very easy to accidentally, probably without even knowing it's, sideline security, right? And it takes real intentional effort to put security first and to really make sure that you're doing something security in every sprint or some action like that. But I think to your point, like executing a semi-annually or annual full code review, like hire a Mandiant, or there's other firms out there that will come in and look at everything and try to break into it because you've paid them to do so, right? And they'll uncover a lot. And then obviously I still think a VDP is worth it, because VDP is very in the moment, finding something that literally could have come out in your last release that you would never have found, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But I think code reviews should be a part of really any sort of SDLC or product, even if you're making hardware. Like obviously WatchGuard makes hardware. Double check your supply chain, make sure the chips aren't running through somewhere they shouldn't, getting stuff they shouldn't have glued onto them, right?
Yeah, accurate.
But another prudent point we've made is this is a lot like Log4Shell, and it's a lot like Log4Shell in the Unify sense, when you were breaking in Unify controllers, under your own control, for the record, NSA. But when you're breaking in Unify controllers, and we've discovered you can create a user. That's persistence, right? Patching does not delete that user, so you have to investigate and find those IOCs.
In fact, it persists it by nature.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same thing here, that patching only helps if you weren't already pwned, right? I think it's an important point of clarification. And I also agree. There's never allow management from the WAN. Like, I know that was the thing. I did it for a long time.
But even then I ACL'd it. Right, but even then I had two insertion points. I had my cloud resource and I had my local resource. Like, even when we did that, we ACL'd that just because the fear of letting someone hammer against my front end interface, was just terrifying to me. And now here it turns out that's a core part of this, like, escalation of privileges. They have to have the management interface exposed initially. So yeah, good advice, Tom, for sure. Yeah, the other points I want to leave it with is I put detection.watchguard.com in the links there. That's the Cyclops Blink main page right now. They've done some really good enumeration. I can't speak directly to the numbers, but this is a less than 1% event. But I wanted to actually just kind of talk about it because it is really good to see, this public-private partnership. And here's what I mean by that. Like, if you look at the history of my exposure, I've been working with the FBI now for a couple of years on several different points that I've brought to them that were very valid, right? Like a major university in California, a major, treasurer in another city in California, 3 or 4 other major universities that were part of this chain of like actually sending emails to all the companies we'd bought, to all the owners of the companies we had bought, and trying to phish them, all MSPs. And so I shared that. And this one particular physics dot something dot something, I won't say who it is, but this subdomain literally ignored the FBI's calls for a year. For a year, even with knock and notifies, nobody seemed to be present. Nobody cared. Their main security team told me on the phone, we don't handle physics dot. We only handle the main domain. And the main company, like literally said, we won't even engage this. Swear to God.
Oh, that little guy. Don't worry about that little guy.
Yeah, don't worry about that one. But I think the point is when you see a good federal and multi international government collaboration like you're seeing with WatchGuard, I was happy to hear how like transparent they're being about this and just saying, listen, this is a major issue. Here's how you detect it. Here's how you fix it. Because once it's notified, like once you say, here's the vulnerability, it's just a king's ransom at that point to go enumerate it.
Right. WatchGuard or any other manufacturer of network.
SonicWall or FortiGate, whoever, front-end people.
The scale is huge. So I would expect a public-private partnership to encompass a lot of the Five Eyes in this scenario, right?
At least two of them at this point, right?
At least two of them, right? Because that's typically where the trade of this kind of stuff occurs, just the way export works with encryption and all that crap. I would expect to see multiple members of the Five Eyes to participate in some sort of public-private partnership. But if we bring this down, if we make it a little less macro, like you and me and MSP serving, like you said, you working with the FBI, we should be encouraging public-private partnership. We should be sharing TTPs and IOCs, even if it's just reporting it on CISA.gov, whatever that page is, right? Because that data, it might not feel like it, but it goes a real long way. Because then if they get 100 of the same thing, you now have a pattern. And I think a big problem in the SMB sector and what makes us such a juicy target is there's never a pattern, right? So they're just chasing rabbit holes that may or may not be related because they don't have any data to put anything together. And someone made a good point to me, a buddy of mine, like, man, I see all these responses for, Maersk is a good example, or Maersk, or however you say it.
Yeah, Merck or whoever.
We don't ever hear about it in SMB. I was like, well, it's not that they don't care, it's that they have nothing to pursue. Like, you can't pursue a legal case without evidence, right? It's just that's not how government works. So I would take, two lessons out of this. One, don't expose management, right? Just don't. It's the same as opening 3389, same exact thing.
Or putting it 3390 if you want to, I suppose, to hide.
Yeah. Don't change the port and then open it either. That's not a thing. No.
Yeah, no.
And Matt will get around that in a second.
But two,
share data with your peers. You can absolutely, and you should absolutely anonymize anything you're going to share about an incident in a public-private partnership, but take advantage of that, because if you can establish a pattern, you can really help on a much more macro scale than you think you can.
Yeah, I have 2 points. Kind of like what's cool about this is, I was on a call with Bryson Medlock, the CRU at ConnectWise, their cyber research unit at ConnectWise this morning, and we were talking about this, and he's already been playing with the Yara rules. Like, if you talk about maturation in our space, if you were consuming something like that, if you were consuming a John Murchison product, or name them, there's tons of them, right? Like Novasoc, you've got 100 of these like escalations of capability companies. They're already starting to search for these Yara rules. They're already starting to take the Styx and Taxi or Yara protocols that break down what are those TTPs, what are those, right? We talked about the Pyramid of Pain today, which was actually a new one to me. It was a very interesting one if you've never looked it up, but I had not. But, you started to take these detections, and before the news even really hits, right? We're early on this. Like the news of this, and especially because of the threat actor being tied to the GRU and being, somewhat Russian in nature, may cause some additional histrionics around this. But they were very much behaving like nation-state players, right? And to kind of define this for you, Cromar, since you're not as much in the space. Most of your threat actors that are these semi-affiliated groups, and I'm being super summative here, the dark sides, the R Evil, the Sono no Kibi, these groups, Conti, they're very financially motivated, right? They intend to actually, they have these large statistics that says, hey, listen, people are in your environment for 300 days or 180 days. The financial actors are probably not. They're probably in and very quickly want to enumerate and very, very quickly want to start attacking and making money before
they're day trading. Like they
100%.
Want to get in and get out before it falls apart. Right?
But a nation state player probably doesn't intend to use ransomware unless their intention is to cover tracks, right? They want to have espionage. They want to gain knowledge gaining capabilities. They want to have a better network of understanding where people are. And so what's interesting about this one is that this was probably a nation state player in the sense that they actually don't have any exfil data. They actually don't have any evidence of this turning into a ransomware event. They actually didn't catch an incident. The United States government came to them, which is really interesting, and said, hey, We think we know of a ransomware group that is now operating as a nation state player on WatchGuard specifically, right? If you look at this ransomware right now, it is Sandworm developed to deploy Cyclops Blink on WatchGuards. But in their statement, they're like, listen, this could be turned into FortiGate. This could be turned into Cisco. This is just a maneuvering mechanism and a delivery mechanism. The same
Well,
TTPs
if the Fed's
could
calling
work.
you,
Yeah,
something has happened that you're not allowed to know about. But they're not just like poking holes everywhere. But I would think that something occurred, right?
Yes.
That is
they were tracking
classified in
something. They had
nature.
intelligence
Right.
of this that went to this intelligence, and now we're saying, wait a minute, we just saw
Which
a pattern
is really
of 94
cool,
of these
that's
IPs.
unheard of in the channel, guys. Like that doesn't happen in the channel. And WatchGuard is very much a channel event. Like they do.
Yeah.
I think. But
You
they're
call
very
Palo
much a
Alto,
channel
they've got a
vendor.
new CVE every 3 Thursdays, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, you know, like, so
But
yeah,
the
you're
fact
right.
That, that they narrowed it down and reached out to the vendor and said, "Hey, here's what's happening." That is really cool to see in the channel. It's progress, I think.
And if you look back, you'll start seeing that WatchGuard over the last 2 months or so has been telling patrons, even though they couldn't break the NDA, they couldn't break these very heavy-handed federal government, United International Government laws. They started saying, hey, maybe don't expose your management interface, right? You'll look back and realize the reason they were saying that is they were seeing active enumeration and attack on these management interfaces that by default are not available. Like they're not open to the internet when you buy a WatchGuard. You have to make that happen. And so they did their best to try to like educate the public without saying, we know of a potential GRU extension that's making nation state presence, but doing nothing with the data, exfilling nothing, only making C² calls. That's it. That's creepy. It's much creepier to not have any evidence of compromise other than the fact that you have this perfect evidence of having full level access to your systems, right? Like from the outside edge. Like,
wouldn't that kind of put them in a, I mean, just thinking layman's terms, right? It would almost put me in a scenario of like, well, what were they going to do? What were they trying to do? What was the intention?
Think about it like physical espionage, and there's this whole concept of sleeper cells, right? Where we send people and they become a citizen.
They work for Boeing for 22 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. They want to sit there and they want to wait. And I think they were hoping that this would not be discovered. And Shiva, you're right. It's totally
it's just like SolarWinds. Had SolarWinds not been discovered in 2019 or 2020 in December by FireEye and Mandiant and those players, they would have still been grabbing up data from our interfaces and gaining mapping exercises and understanding where things live, because that's what you do in espionage. We do it too. I'm not pointing fingers and not having others point back at us. We do the same damn thing, right, Dom? I mean, never mind. You're not allowed to talk about that. So, tease.
No, and this is not the last time we're going to see this. And I guess another point we need to be driving home is don't panic, right? Like, this is going to happen. It's going to happen with your WatchGuards today. It's going to happen with another vendor tomorrow. Well, that's fair.
That's a good
right? I read the same thing. I'm like, accurate statement.
Yeah.
But don't panic. Like, these things are going to happen. Respond. Definitely respond.
Definitely
quickly.
respond. Be ready to investigate
panic.
and understand. Yeah, like absolutely. And I think what we're getting in is like, oh, go ahead, Kumar.
I was going to say, this is totally unrelated technology, but man, you look at some of the names of these bad actors with Sandworm, aka, Voodoo Bear, creating things called Cyclops Blink. Like, the combination of those names doesn't sound like a bunch of bad actors and threats. It sounds like a hipster band lineup from Williamsburg. You know what I mean? Like, it's just...
Here's my advice on that. Read the Wikipedia article about classified data, and it'll talk you through this thing called code word clearance, and it'll go through some ancient World War I, no longer classified. But some of the names that Uncle Sam creates for things is they're out there.
And it's helpful to know, Cromar, like, and I touch on this.
I love that,
yeah, it's accurate, Shiva. But like, these names often get created by whoever's the loudest about this threat actor group early. It's not like they ascribe these names. These are coming from Matt and Dom going, let's call this thing Purple Turkey. Like, this is Purple Turkey. Those bastards at Purple Turkey or Menacing Fox or whatever it is. It might even just be these, like as Shiva said, Dino Pass to create
Dino
the name.
passing it. It's a code name because now we can talk about Purple Turkey. wherever we
Yeah.
want, and nobody knows what we're talking about.
And it has no ascription to whatever the basic conversation was.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like
So
you can't
let's
call
leave,
it the definitely not Russians. That doesn't work.
You can't definitely say, don't look over here in Russia. It's not us. You
Right.
can't call it
Yeah.
that. But I will say you have all the parts of this being very nation state player. You've got a federal or intelligence space that found it. You've also got some pretty massive improvement, but also really cool that you don't see very much like, you don't see very much enumeration or egress of data. The coolest part about this was, I actually had a very nihilistic view and a very pessimistic view of like where the world is when it comes to starting to tell people to patch. And I said, listen, if I asked, have you guys, and I won't say who I was on the phone with, but some of the people internal to WatchGuard, and said, listen, have you guys done a showdown enumeration? Like how many of these firewalls exist with that? And they kind of got back to me and said the number. And I said, well, that's huge. And he said, but Matt, I said, we started telling people 2 months ago to start getting rid of your management interface and doing that, even though we made it by default not that way. And people started doing it. We watched the numbers shrink, right? Because you have to imagine, when you're notified of this by the feds, you don't get to tell people until you're released, right? They're doing investigation. They want to find out if you can solve it. And so you have to like walk through this real long like line where you love your people, the people consuming your firewalls, and you want to try to like do everything you can to reduce their risk, even if they made bad decisions with your stuff. And so they were talking me through this cool change they made where now if you expose external interfaces, not only does it tell you, hey, you're an idiot while you're doing it, it leaves a permanent mark on the top of the firewall that always says, hey, guy, your stuff's exposed to any external. And so like
I love that.
They're making it to where you like have a contextual awareness of what you're doing, and it makes it harder for you to argue that you've been a reasonable person. If the firewall itself tells you, hey, don't use non-complex stuff, or hey, don't expose this to the internet, and you get told you're doing it, you kind of are dancing this line of and you're dancing this line of like, where can the vendor just step in and take your hands away from you and not let you do things stupid, but in the same breath not fight this battle of, oh, those guys just won't let me work the way I want to work. Yeah, because it's stupid.
Because it's wrong. Yeah. And that's not even an op-ed anymore. Like I would not
empirically backed.
Yeah. I'm not write a blog article and be like, in my opinion, I'd be like, no, if you do this, it is a fact that you are wrong. Like you just are.
I don't stand on many points like that, but I would stand very hard on that from a management. It's like, we're going to do self-service password reset and we're going to expose it to the world and require no factors. And we're just going to leave that open and nothing bad will happen. Like, no, you're wrong. Right. That's a bad idea. Like,
all I need is your dog's name and your favorite city, man. You're good.
Yeah. Nobody
else is going to know that ever.
Yeah, accurate. So I don't want to keep people too long. I want to do this to be a very short brief on the WatchGuard, Cyclops malop that's seemingly nation state, but certainly well in a very minor point for MSPs. So if you hear this and you're panicking, it's probably not you. And it's really not a huge external risk for you other than patching, which you should be on a pretty good cadence of doing anyway. But if it is you and you're exposing your management interfaces accidentally or otherwise, because I've seen that happen, it'd probably be a call to action to start thinking about how you reduce risk, right? How you carve off layers of risk by saying, nope, I'm not going to make that even an option to attack this. So if there is a vulnerability, it can't be reached. And so my one takeaway is if you have a WatchGuard, go look at your external management rule. If it says any external or any other methodology, automatic. Yeah. Right. Shiva, like I could kiss you right now. Yes. You should patch them automatically. They should just go down at 2 a.m. Everybody's expecting it. They get rebooted. You check to see if any are outside of framework. Yeah. 100%. But definitely take this as a point to get call to action to say, hey, listen, vulnerabilities can appear everywhere. How can I take steps to reduce vulnerabilities from being something that's impactful? Just because it's a 9 doesn't mean it's impactful. So anyways, any closing thoughts for us, Dom, and then we'll go to you, Ryan?
No, I just reiterate, respond, don't panic, right? If you panic, you're going to do it wrong. So respond, but don't panic.
Yeah, don't panic. And I agree with this. I would fall on the side of rather having a brick device than a pwn device, 100%. I'd rather take this defensible action of automatically patching than this non-defensible action of just, hopefully I don't want to interrupt business, so I'm not going to do a patch tonight. I'm going to wait until I can be very controlled. And,
I was just going to agree with the brick device piece. I'd rather have a bookend than something that's absolutely useless and working against me. So absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. I'd rather brick that toaster before the transformers turn it into a bad toaster than turning it into.
Oh, that's good stuff.
That's awesome. If you use WatchGuard, patch your WatchGuard. If you see a lot of things coming out as this nation state histrionics becomes something, right? Anytime you see the word Russia with Ukraine right now, it's going to be fairly histrionic. So, not to get political, but take this with a grain of salt, do some assessment, and really see it, in my opinion, for what it is. I really, really, really love it. Nice. I really, really want to thank WatchGuard for being so transparent on this and for trying to get ahead of it, and also for really working deeply with the federal government. Like that's always, I know that's terrifying. And if I had anything I could say to the federal government, when someone collaborates with you, why don't you like maybe fucking respond back and let them know some information? Not asking for a friend. It's definitely not my own experience.
I was going to call that out earlier. I can't think of a person that I know in this world that would get multiple phone calls from the FBI and just ostrich bury their head in the sand. Like I couldn't think of a worse reaction.
It happens every day. Yeah.
Wow.
It's even worse if you're Homeland Security. Like one of the challenges CISA faces is they fall under HHS and people are terrified. Like it happens. It's constant. So yeah, actually I had to, this is funny. So I'll go on one quick tangent and then we'll drop off. We have a huge number of people watching right now, but put together a counter hack Russia best defense. Like I was asked to write these dystopian job descriptions for the future for this Australian thought experiment. And one of the ones I came up with is the ATRS, the automatic threat response system, right? Where we have this escalating set of attacks against life control systems, federal power systems,
war games,
transportation.
Man.
Like this drop dead switch of this AI attack response. And somebody was there managing it. And one of the lines I put in there is must not have a moral objection to ending human life over technical qualifications, and it was interesting. Yeah, that's funny. All right, I'm good. Thank you guys so very much. Yeah, Shiva's actually running a very successful podcast, so he's not wrong. Like we'll get better at the management of getting people in these things, but we really just wanted to get the information out really quickly. So this will be a developing story. Hopefully it doesn't develop any worse than it is, but right now it's a real positive one. Just go patch. So, and I'm not sure what's going on with this one, but I'm gonna have to do some digging on what this VUN and VUM
spammers you're gonna need to block.
It might be that. You may be right. So thank you guys so much.
All right.
See everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,